I like it. Got it.
Good afternoon. I'm with Alex Porfirenko today to talk about his white paper, Why Do So Many Software Solutions in the Federal Government Become Orphans and How to Avoid It. First, Alex, tell us about your background.
So my background is what led me to write the white paper. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, but I started out doing contracts and acquisitions on the federal side. So I saw how the federal contracts were made. Then I went and worked for a value-added reseller. So I saw how the middleman would get solutions and software into the government. And then to make it really fun, I worked for a Silicon Valley unicorn trying to sell into the federal government. So I got to see how the software vendors actually try to sell their solutions. So I got to see things from all different perspectives. And that's actually the baseline of what led me to write the white paper.
That sounds like you've had a lot of experience in this area. Um, Tell us why you thought it was important to write this white paper.
Um, so a lot of it started on the personal level because I saw repeated solutions that were just left wither on the vine and die in the federal government. And I started asking questions why. I also implemented a lot of software solutions, and it was very painful for anybody who has ever done that. And I started thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way of doing this thing. And so I started asking questions of people who were, putting the deal together. And then that one thing led to another. And I started then looking at the root causes of what made them do what they do, specifically why they chose to include or exclude certain things in the contracts. And that actually led me to root cause analysis. And I just thought it was important to lay it out for everyone to see, because not everybody kind of understands that process, or even less people understand the incentives for all the people involved who are involved in the process. So I thought if I laid that out and basically say, here's the industry, and here's a few holes that I see that repeatedly cause trouble for implementation and post-implementation support. And this is how you fix them. There's no one magic bullet that does it. But I thought that was important to kind of lay that out and try to make this process and this government contracting world a slightly better place.
Good, good. We all need that.
Fair
What
enough.
surprised you most about how the federal government does IT?
Um, Once again, going to the root cause of things, I think a lot of people don't understand how many hands touch the solicitation and the purchase of that software before it actually gets there. I mean, you're talking about technical people, you're talking about senior level executives who are sponsoring it. You're talking about contracting and acquisition officers, the legal teams. I mean, you're talking about a huge myriad of people who actually have their hands on this solicitation. So a lot of people don't understand how that works. And then that's probably the next question, but there's also a complicated way how you actually get the software solution into the government. But as soon as you realize how many hands touch the solicitation, you can begin to understand why there are a lot of holes in that contract, and why the people who are responsible for buying the software are not the people who are responsible for delivering it. And the people who are then running it are a whole different party of its own at the tail end of this process. And they don't actually often get a lot of say up front. So once you understand the complexity of that whole process, you begin to understand why there's so many holes in many of the solicitations that you see.
And how you can get into this and succeed in this market. Yeah.
Correct. Look, per the principle, 80% of the time, things could be explained by 20% of the inputs. So the biggest challenges are how the software companies shape the acquisition upfront. And a lot of the times it's also how the government buys it, right? And when you're dealing with on the government side, different entities who have their own incentives, when you start looking at that whole process, you begin to understand that is the really, those two things really contribute to 80% of the time why implementation fails or there's no support for the software once it goes live.
Great. So if I'm an IT vendor and I'm thinking about getting into the federal market space, what are the most important things to have in mind before you make that decision?
Probably the most important thing is to have a lot of patience and to understand that this is not a very short and easy road to get there.
Yeah.
So a lot of times in the private sector, you have executives who want to see return on investment 6 to 9 months down the road, a year at the most. That's the way typically software industry works in the private sector. In the government, that's basically not long enough to even get the money for the contract and put the contract out on the street. So
Yeah.
a solicitation could take 2 to 3 years before it materializes. So the ramp up time required to actually do business with the federal government is significant. It is a strategic company. It's a strategic investment for the company. So that's the bad news. The really good news is once you get into it and get yourself established, that's a steady revenue stream because most of the government contracts go on for 5 years.
Hmm.
So once you establish a federal practice and you actually get the pieces right, it becomes a revenue generating machine that can help companies sustain recessions, downturns in the economy. I mean, there's a reason why Lockheed Martin, Booz Allen Hamilton, and Raytheons of the world are doing so well. It's because they have a sustainable base that pretty much is recession proof. So that's the flip side of that. You know, you have a lot of sunk costs and a ramp up time, but the byproduct of that is you basically generate a stable revenue source for a company that you can tap into when times are bad.
That's great. It's great to know. What are some of the traps that new entrants to the IT market fall into, and how can they protect themselves from them?
So there are so many things that the new entrants need to be aware of and how they organize. I mean, uh, getting the team right is always the first step pretty much in any enterprise you do. So getting a small number of people who understand their competency. You're talking about lawyers who understand government contracts. You're talking about sales team who can get going that 2 to 3 years life cycle. They can get going early. You're talking about organizationally, you have to separate this unit within your organization because eventually you're going to get a security clearance. And it's a lot easier to separate that up front than at the tail end. So there are security requirements you need to bear in mind. But yeah, it really starts out with the team. You really need to understand your channel strategy because that's how you can lose a lot of money pretty quickly, is going through all the middle people. So you need to be able to understand that. So there's a lot of moving pieces that you need to put together, and each one takes a little bit of time, and they all need to kind of interact with each other. And it's like a Swiss Army watch. It has a lot of moving parts. If one breaks, it will heavily impact the others. But when it works together, it's a beautiful money-making machine. It's a thing of beauty.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Your time today, Alex. I urge everybody who saw this video to read what I found to be a very interesting white paper on how software works in federal IT. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.